Wargaming's latest vehicle is one that I genuinely thought wouldn't be very good, and the burst gameplay that I decided to play in this vehicle, it was outrageous. So yeah, it completely surprised me as to how I ended up getting a result like this. Granted, the gameplay was maybe quite well suited to this vehicle, and so you can't expect it every single time, but the key thing is that it was possible to have an outrageous game in this vehicle. So that is a big thumbs up for the beginning of this vehicle, kind of my experience playing it. And of course, this vehicle does indeed have the siege mode mechanic, as you saw very quickly. There we are playing in probably the best matchup that you can hope for, playing up against tier 7 vehicles with the Lycan on the enemy team, of course, the tier 7 light tank. And yeah, this is probably the best matchup that you can hope for, and that's maybe one of the factors as to how we managed getting such a good game. Now, this position here, it's basically going to be one of the positions where we're able to farm the enemy team massively throughout this entire game. But my key thing with this vehicle is that it kind of is annoying to play. It's very, very frustrating to play because its DPM is not particularly great. But it is also very, very good for the most part. But yeah, I just don't quite know whether I do find this tank to be super competitive or whether it's just pretty sucky. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the game in the background is definitely going to showcase the top end gameplay, but having played maybe 5 games in this thing, you can consistently deal damage, and it is a good tank. It is not a bad tank. No one is going to be complaining about how this is the most horrendous vehicle in the game, but it just feels like, I don't know, it's, yeah, I just feel like the DPM is maybe just a little bit too slow for my liking, and yeah, I guess that's my primary negative with the vehicle. Now, if you want to use the DPM of this tank, and if you want to use it to the best of its ability, you do have to be in the siege mode rather than the speed mode, because of course by going in the speed mode you sacrifice the gun statistics that this tank has, and in the actual siege mode you have unbelievable accuracy, quite possibly the best medium tank accuracy at tier 9. It is like 0.2 something, which is unbelievably good. I mean, you guys will probably know that the Gorilla has somewhat similar accuracy, probably slightly less, well, better accuracy but less dispersion. So yeah, I mean, it's very close in terms of the accuracy of this, and of course this one's way more flexible. It gets 15 degrees of gun depression, because why wouldn't you be able to poke over a ridge without even exposing any of your tank? And of course that is very, very good for scenarios where you can just find opponents. Now, in this gameplay so far, we haven't really had to deal with anything, and the majority of the enemy team have kind of been sat out. In front of us we're just farming, and we've picked up 2,800 damage. So my chat about how the DPM sucks, well, I mean, it's kind of showing me that it doesn't suck that bad, because within a few short amount of engagements we've been able to pick up 3,000 damage. Now, right there we managed to bounce a tank, which I was kind of surprised about. Granted, it is the tier 7 French tank destroyer that probably doesn't have the best penetration, and of course it was hitting the most angled part of our armour at the front, because we were very well kind of over rotated, so I'm not surprised we bounced that one as well. But one thing I really did enjoy about this tank as well was the kind of, you can swap between flanks super quickly because of the mobility, and that doesn't necessarily get utilised straight away within this game, but it does come into effect later on. But the key thing that I found with this vehicle in the other games that I played was that you could suddenly, you know, you're aiming at one tank and then suddenly you're looking at a different one, but the accuracy is so good, like unbelievably good, that I really did enjoy playing this like no end. It was actually one of the funnest tanks I've played, and it gives you something extra to think about with the siege mode mechanic that you don't see with some of the other vehicles. Am I going to say that this is the best tier 9 medium in the game? No, I don't think it is the best tier 9 medium. You've got things like the Leopard PTA, which are very, very good. Of course, the Tech Tree kind of counterpart, I guess, which doesn't have the siege mode mechanic. I mean, it's very up to your own personal opinion, but this tank is certainly a good one. It is up there with the top tier 9 mediums, but it kind of does get let down by some of the problems with, of course, being able to mobilize. Yes, you can go really fast, but you end up with terrible dispersion because of that, and you end up with sacrificing some of the damage per minute of the vehicle, and essentially you have to use that mode if you want to go anywhere, because if you don't use it, I think it's about 35 kilometers an hour, which we all know is painfully slow in the game, and so yeah, not particularly the greatest. Now we try and go for a nice shot into the cupola of the E75, looking down on it. Unfortunately doesn't manage to actually pen, but what we can do now is come down and hopefully get a shot into the lower plate of the E75, finishing them off, and of course picking up a decent chunk of damage. And you'll be noting that the damage on every single shell is 390, so it's nice to have the 390 alpha on this tier 9 medium, because what you can do is rack up damage quite nicely in shorter engagements than if you were to have a more rapid fire gun. But of course, in doing that, you do lose the potential for maybe getting some more assistance due to tracks and stuff like that. But it's not that big of a deal for me, at least personally. So, having been in the siege mode mechanic and lying around the exact same spot in the map for a long period of time, maybe it's time for us to actually move. And I'm thinking, you know what, it's 8 to 6, I don't want to do anything absolutely brash, but with the game kind of coming to a close and having done 5.9 thousand damage so far in a tier 9, you're probably wanting to kind of get forward and do something else. So that is exactly what we're hoping to do. And so very quickly we decide in a short period of time that it's time to actually start moving, and you see us kind of moving forward. I realise, I'm not in the actual fast mode, and I quickly realised that this is the first game that I played, and then I was like, you know what, it's just terrible trying to go in the siege mode and trying to cross anywhere, so why not jump into the super speed mode, which allows you to go up to about 65 kilometers an hour, and if you had any of the engine boost that you could potentially use on this tank to bring it up even higher, maybe 70 kilometers an hour is the top speed, you could potentially get this to, but it does kind of suffer on the top end of its speed limit because of the fact that it just doesn't have the horsepower to maintain that speed. You're seeing what happens when you start going up a hill, you suddenly drop to about 20 kilometers an hour, even in the turbo mode that this tank has. But at this point I'm like, well, maybe let's try out this gun depression that everyone keeps raving about with the Kunterpanzer, and it ends up being very, very nice. I mean, it's a super slim shot for people to be able to reliably get, and luckily, because we're not a bot, we're actually aiming fully at these vehicles, and with the superb accuracy that you get with this vehicle, it's very difficult to miss, and so at this point I'm just trying to farm as much damage as possible. Our team is almost certainly guaranteed to win, and I'd really have to throw it quite hard if we were to lose, so we're just going to push forward, try and get some shells of damage on whoever we can, maybe some more assistance potentially, and by the looks of things we managed to hit the CS there from behind on the move, because yeah, why wouldn't you? CS44 on the enemy team does get spotted by us, I believe, but he's out of the way, and with a full health TNH VZ 51 we go for the tracking shot. Unfortunately don't even manage to track him, and we didn't even do any damage either, so now it's time to fully aim, put a shell into that tracks him so that anyone else that hits him is going to be giving me assistance damage, hit him again, once again retracking him, and then of course setting him up to be taken out by our standard B. So a brilliant game in the Kunterpanzer, and really did enjoy using it. So yeah, it was really good. 7,742 damage, 2,106 assistance, or 2,106 experience, so that's base XP, and 5 enemies taken out, along with a decent chunk of silver and 1,378 assistance. So overall 9,000 combined damage in this absolute beast, and it was actually gifted to me by Fat Little Bernie, so thank you very much for going out of your way to actually send me this on the game. So yeah, I really do appreciate it massively. It does help me out a great deal with doing these reviews. But let's jump into the next replay of this tank and see whether or not it can still keep up to the damage numbers that the first game did. So the next gameplay that we had is of course playing in the Kunze on Fisherman's Bay, and this is a very good match for the Kunze Panzer generally, but it ends up going quite sour quite quickly. But we're going to see how the tank can cope in the matches where maybe things don't go all your way, because ultimately, like, I don't know, 50% of the games don't go your way on average if you're a average player. In fact, I think the average win rate of a player is like 48% or something like that. So more than often than not, for the average player, it ends up being worse than it is good. So we're going to see how this thing can fare even in those matchups. And of course, starting off, not a brilliant start, taking a damage for 1 damage done, missing the enemy Kunze Panzer, who for some reason is just YOLOing through the centre of the map and exposing himself to our entire team, but no one actually decides to hit him at all, and he keeps cresting, but there we go. Kunze Panzer is definitely a vehicle that I found it could be used quite well if you know and have used the siege mode mechanics. If you're brand new and you've not actually played with any of the siege mode mechanic tanks, things like the UDES 1516, any of the UDES or Swedish medium tanks that have the mechanic, if you've played with the Swedish TDs that have this mechanic, then maybe this would be a brilliant choice of tank for you to play in, and because it is very much in that similar sort of vein, except having much better accuracy and having a decent chunk of damage, as well as having a lot better mobility than both of those vehicles, other than of course when you start looking at the Swedish TD that can go ridiculously fast backwards. But there we go. So in this game, looking pretty bad. Our team have kind of all sunk themselves in a couple of squares on the map, which is never a good sign. Not having a good spread out team deployment, creating a lot of angles, is never a good sign, unless you of course lemming rush an entire flank and just quick win. But yeah, other than that, it's really not looking good. So I think from the central position, which is kind of vital in Fisherman's Bay, we've got to do something. And so my first initial reaction is, let's get rid of this KPZ. So we find him out in the open, and of course place a round straight into the side, but I'm knowing full well that this guy needs to get gone, so we take him out of the game, even if it means taking a hit, because we've got to do something, because inaction sometimes is actually just as bad as if you were to YOLO through the middle of the field, because you end up just severely negatively impacting your own game. But knowing full well that we have a Kunze Panzer on the enemy team on pretty chunky amount of hit points, we've also got the CS, I believe it was, on the enemy team, kind of in the middle, as well as a now YOLOing T-54E1. I'm thinking, me and this medium tank are probably not going to be able to deal with all three if they decide to YOLO them, and there doesn't seem to be that many tanks that could punish these tanks if they did decide to YOLO, so I didn't want to really rely on it. So at this point, I'm thinking, you know what, maybe we should relocate and get somewhere else. And of course, using the mobility of the Kunze, we can move. And you saw there that the firing on the move in this tank was not particularly the best idea. It doesn't have very good dispersion. As you saw there, not able to hit the T-30 in the side. But remember, most mediums are not particularly well versed to well, you shouldn't be firing on the move in most times unless you genuinely can't afford to. But this one may be less so than the standard medium, so just keep an eye on that. Now, one thing that we do in this game is play very passively, and that is probably what this tank lends itself to. It is not a facehugger. If you try and play this like an Object 140 or a T62A or a medium tank that has just a little bit of armour, playing it super aggressively, you don't have enough. The tank just isn't quite enough to be able to do that. You don't have the DPM that's outrageously good so that you can just punish everyone and anything that sits in front of you for any period of time. And you also don't have the armour whatsoever to bounce anything, so every single round that enters your vehicle is or any round that hits your vehicle is going to enter it, and you're going to end up taking some damage. So you've got to be aware of that when deciding what you want to do. Of course, so far, very slow game, 2,123 damage, and this is probably what most of your games are going to look like in the Kunterpanzer. It's not necessarily the easiest tank for most players to get accustomed to, and you're seeing that's probably the case for most people. Now, the enemy 268 version 5 succumbs to the Jaeger on our team, which is perfect. Unfortunately, didn't manage to get the tracking damage, even though I thought we would have, since we went for the track on the 268 version 5 to avoid him cropping up and then becoming a real problem or pain in our front side. So yeah, unfortunately that didn't get any assistance, but the intent was there. So, still in the speed boost mechanic, and sometimes it's actually worth being in the speed boost mechanic even if you are trying to shoot at things, because remember, having the speed to get out of there might be really crucial, and you can avoid taking further hits that maybe you wouldn't want to have. And so yeah, it's kind of just one of those. Now, knowing full well that the game is kind of in a bit of a stalemate and there has to be something, the deadlock really needs to be broken at this point, it's time to relocate once again, and using the speed, which I love having this mechanic to be able to do that, we of course move, and that's exactly what we're after here. And having done so, we really do open ourselves up to be able to get some damage on some of the mediums that are kind of YOLOing through the middle of the map, and this is what we didn't want to happen to us earlier, and hence why we moved over to this spot. Unfortunately, it probably wasn't necessary to come over to this spot, since the enemy team didn't YOLO as hard as I maybe thought that they would have done. But nonetheless, we could have been opened up by maybe things like the Object 268 version 5, and it could have been very bad from that position onwards. Now, I know we've done only 2,500 damage, and you're probably thinking, I thought that this was supposed to be an okay game, and granted, it's not really an okay, well, it's an average game, I think, for a tier 9 medium, so it's always difficult in a review to give your unbiased opinion while showing like superb gameplay. So the first one is your general top tier gameplay, where you everything goes right. People are sitting in front of you when you're playing in this very snipey medium tank that has brilliant accuracy and has good spotting distance and all of these extra things. But what happens when you are forced into a gameplay style that doesn't just suit your tank? Well, this is what happens. It is not particularly the most versatile tank when it comes to playing as an all-rounder. I just don't think it has enough. But I feel like maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on the tank. It's still good, it's just not excellent. And I was hoping it would be excellent, but it is what it is. It is a tank that is good. It's fairly well balanced. I don't think anyone's going to be crying about the fact that they got hit by a Kunterpanzer anytime soon. And yeah, it's very much like a slightly altered version of maybe the Leopard PTA is essentially what I'm thinking with this vehicle. And you can see here, managing to pick up some extra damage at the end of the game, using the speed mechanic to push forward and get the rest of the damage left in the game, picking up 4,300 damage, and of course 5 enemies destroyed again within this replay. So a fairly decent result. Of course, 1,700 base experience in this thing means that it's probably a above average game in this thing, but first class, and of course, yeah, just showcasing probably a more normal game for someone in the Kunterpanzer. But there we go. Hopefully that was a decent holistic view of the Kunterpanzer. Am I recommending you to go out of your way and just buy this thing? No. But if you are very interested in the German medium playstyle and you like the UDES siege mode mechanic, then this is almost a perfect match for you as a player, and it certainly is a high skill cap tank that I think the top players in the game will make use of the most, but for the average player I would probably avoid this tank for the most part. Other than that, I hope you did enjoy, and if you want to stay tuned for more of the new tanks, including the EOC that has come out as part of the Tank Cup, then stay tuned in the next coming days, as those will be featured along with a ton of other vehicles, and of course coming up to Christmas, the face reveal, of course, of me. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is completely up to you. But there we go. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you join me in the next video. Goodbye.